what we do agree on is that a professional body, which stands for professionalism, is the combination of, on the one hand, established and verified competency, which normally comes by way of a qualification or continuous professional development, including workshops and seminars, et cetera, but a combination of that, which is competency, and very much acting together or in concert with professional and accountable behavior at all times. As we go through this presentation, you'll see that the behavioral aspect is actually more important as far as a professional body and professional recognition is concerned than, in fact, the competency is important, because one assumes that the competency is proven either because the person is actually doing the job, or alternatively, because in doing the job, the person is acting with professional competency. The best example I can use is a pediatrician. A pediatrician is absolutely brilliant on the medical aspects of things, but who also is extremely perverse in terms of things we won't even talk about, but unethical, immoral conduct, will never be recognized as a professional. They'll be recognized as competent, but never recognized as a professional. Now, you might say, but hold on a moment, that's got nothing to do with a manufacturing sector or a supply sector. But what the South African Qualifications Authority has said is that every single sector that recognizes professionals has to hold them accountable for how they behave and how they perform as a professional, as much as hold them accountable for what they do in terms of their professional conduct. So I think it's absolutely critical that we understand and we acknowledge that. So we're talking about the professional body, and we're talking about a professional body which meat and potato business of the professional body is what we call designations. So whereas a training provider would give a qualification, a professional body would give a designation, which is the recognition of professional status of an individual. Now, you might not know it, but for example, I bet many people on this call don't know, but do you know that there is a professional body for domestic workers, and a professional domestic worker who's worked as a domestic worker for 5 or 6 years is recognized by the South African Qualifications Authority as a professional domestic worker. The same in the gardening sector, the same in many other sectors where you would assume a laborer is a laborer is a laborer, as opposed to being a professional person at what they do. And what professional bodies are, first and foremost, is that our government's mechanism for transformation in giving people who have done a job for 10 or 15 or 20 years, but do not have a qualification and have no recognition, giving them professional recognition at the level at which they operate. That doesn't mean that a paint chemist is not the most highly qualified level of professional in the manufacturing sector. Of course he or she is. But quite frankly, the paint mixer who might have been doing that job for 10 or 15 years is equally, in their own right, at their own level, a professional. And that's really what professional body work is about. It's about the dignity of the job that the person does, not the level of the job that the person does. So in surface coatings, what we're doing is we're implementing a system which is capable of defining, recognizing, and certifying professionalism amongst employees and managers, and then developing and refining their professionalism by way of reflective and current best global practices, which ordinarily we would call continuous professional development. And as we go further, you'll see what I mean by continuous professional development. So the designation framework, which is the meat and potato stuff of a professional body, it's their main product. That designation framework says that we want to recognize professionals who manage departments or companies, who work in either a technical or an operational capacity in companies in terms of the import, the supply, the raw material distribution industry in your case, who lead organizations within the entire profession, who deal in quality assurance and compliance, who are professionally qualified in their designated fields of practice, who operate as independent practitioners and consultants. So that's, if you want, the body of people within a particular professional body that are ordinarily recognized at various levels, we call them bands, of professional competence. So A professional designation framework is like a spreadsheet. It's the entire system of recognition of all the people who work in an industry or a sector at various levels and across various jobs. It's called a taxonomy because it's an integrated spreadsheet of all of the possible titles of designations which might exist in an industry or sector. And it indicates designation categories and labels which practitioners can apply for and be awarded for a set period of time, ordinarily 3 years on average, and has to be renewed every 3 years or in year 4. Now, the importance of that is that unless that individual does two things, unless they participate in whatever continuous professional development is offered within their company or by the industry bodies or by the professional body, unless they participate in continuous professional development, which might be reading a journal article or reading a newspaper or a magazine, or might be attending a workshop on product knowledge or process knowledge or best practice, whatever it is, unless whatever CPD is presented to them, and that's the job of the professional body to make sure that there's enough continuous professional development in place at every level for these individuals. But unless they participate in continuous professional development, and equally, unless they keep as a good behavioral record with their current employer. So we say we don't want them to have disciplinary warnings on file which are active, which haven't been dealt with. We don't want them to be in bad standing with their employer. Unless their employer says, the guy's got a disciplinary warning on file, but we still think he's a professional for the following reasons, then the professional body will refuse to renew that person's professional recognition. And that's absolutely critical, we think, as well. So designations are organized according to 3 levels: the technical level, the operational level, and the professional practitioner level. And we call those levels bands. So there's a technical band. And the technical band is up to about 3 years of experience, very often no qualifications. And the person is a laborer or an assistant at entry level jobs within your company. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have a technician at a more senior than entry-level job. It's absolutely up to you to determine. And part of what we're doing today is talking about identifying subject matter experts who understand the jobs in your companies, who can work with us in identifying the jobs that are either technical or operational or professional, so that we can start designing the designations which are required to recognize your employees against. The operational level is a very interesting level, because the operational level is one that says, that operational band, is one that says, this is a person in your department who generally tends to do most of the work, but isn't recognized and very often isn't paid as a fully qualified professional. And we know that those people are there. We know that many of those people are there because the history of this country has prevented them from maybe getting a qualification, not so much so in the coating sector, by the way, but certainly that's generally the history of the country. And they have not had access to being able to get a qualification to be able to be recognized. And then the final and the major level, the most important level or band from an industry's credibility perspective is that of professional practitioner. And in the manufacturing sector, it might very well be the paint chemist who's a professional practitioner in coatings manufacture. Now, what's critically important is, and I'm going to talk about that in a little while, how I can use continuous professional development for someone who's maybe recognized at the technical level, but who's allowed to participate in the operational level of continuous professional development. And if they complete the operational level of continuous professional development, that person will be allowed to apply to be recognized as a professional operational practitioner, and not necessarily stay at the professional technical or professional technician practitioner level. So it's critically important that we understand continuous professional development is, quite frankly, more important in a professional body and to a professional body than professional recognition is. So please, I'd like you to bear that in mind at the back of your mind. The fourth band of designations is a band that someone doesn't apply to be recognized against, but is nominated by other professional practitioners to be recognized against. You might think of this as an honorary professional designation, except at the moment you give someone an honorary professional designation, the same requirement of 3 years worth of continuous professional development kicks in. But in this instance, we'll look to that master practitioner to maybe run workshops, to maybe coach and mentor, to maybe participate in leadership structures such as SAPMA or the Surface Coating Association, to maybe help develop additional courses and material in continuous professional development as their continuous professional development requirement for them to retain that master recognition. Any questions about this before I carry on?
No.
All right. Now, within each of these bands, it's called levels here, but within each of these bands, technical, operational, professional, or masters, you could very well have multiple sub-levels. So you could have 3 technician or technical level designations and 2 operational, and maybe 2 practitioners. But at this moment in time, we're only wanting to focus on 1 per band to get this professional body taxonomy, designation taxonomy established. And then to come back and re-examine whether or not we're catering to all of the jobs with all of the variations, et cetera, et cetera. Ordinarily, a variation between jobs might be catered for in 1 designation, but within multiple range statement opportunities. And Tara, you'll understand what I mean by range statements, where a competency could have a range statement. For example, a bank teller might have a range statement for their designation that says either they can count money manually or they can count it with an automated machine. So that's a range statement. You know, along a continuum, you might go from manual to digital, from analog to digital, et cetera, et cetera. Or you need completely different designations to achieve that objective. But that will really, as we become more and more sophisticated with how we develop designations, it'll become more obvious what we can do. And the one thing I do want to say is, please remember, the professional body and the designations are not owned by the South African Qualifications Authority. They're owned by you, the people who own the businesses and the people who work in the businesses. At this stage, any questions?
None my side.
No, nothing.
Right, so moving on. So what is the relationship between a training provider and a professional body? Training providers are subservient to professional bodies. They're accredited or they're recognized by a professional body, and their qualifications are mapped against the professional body taxonomy. So every designation has a qualification mapped to it. Where there are no qualifications in an industry or a sector, we map matric or grade 11 or grade 10 to the designation. So you could say an entry-level technician designation is fine for someone who has a grade 10 school qualification and 3 years worth of experience on the job in a supply or an import or a distribution company within the coating sector. Whereas at the professional level, you want the paint chemist qualification. Or maybe at the professional level, you need a qualification in import and distribution, or even accountancy. So the qualifications you map to the designations are the qualifications which, and only which, are recognized by the employers as important in the jobs that the people do in the workplace. It's got nothing to do with what the South African Qualifications Authority says is required to be registered and accredited to be able to be offered by training providers. That's not this game. Training providers are quality assured by a professional body. So if we recognize training providers who can prepare people for the import, so let's, for example, say Tara at SAPMA goes off and asks the South African College of Importers to run a 1-year course in the theory and practice of importing and understanding SARS and customs and excise and international treaties, et cetera, on behalf of SAPMA. And we map that qualification, which, by the way, doesn't have to be accredited for professional bodies' needs. So it doesn't necessarily have to be accredited, but we map that qualification into our professional designation. then the professional body itself will then annually quality assure how the South African College of Importers is actually running that qualification for our members to make sure that the guidelines, the criteria for quality assurance are satisfied. Now, why is that important? That's important because the South African Quality Qualifications Authority registers professional bodies, but only after they have been in existence for a minimum of 3 years, and only after they have a critical mass of people who've obtained their designations over that 3-year period. And only then will the South African Qualifications Authority look at our quality system that's in place, our management information system that's in place, our history and track record of member management, of designation awarding, of continuous professional development, and say, right, now you're running as a proper professional body, we'll register you as a professional body. So it's up to the professional body to quality assure the training providers where those qualifications have been mapped into our professional designations that we offer. Training providers may enjoy dual recognition in that besides being recognized as offering whole SAPMA or Qualification Council for Trade and Occupation or Council for Higher Education qualifications, so they're accredited for that purpose, but they may also offer continuous professional development programs that we require these professionals at the technical, the operational, and the professional, and even the master's level to participate in, either for horizontal or vertical purposes. And I'll come back to that distinction again in a minute. So one really needs to understand the difference between a professional designation and a qualification. A qualification is offered by an accredited training provider. Once earned, no one can take that qualification away from you. And even if its outcomes are based and formulated within the framework of academia, they're minimally responsive or engaging with the world of work. Very often they're too academic. Qualifications are very academic because training providers very seldom have a link to what's going on in the real world. Sometimes in, for example, the manufacturing sector, it might be different, but certainly the majority of training provision qualifications registered by the normal SACWA structures or the QCTO structures or the Council of Higher Education, very academic, very out of touch with what goes on in the world of work. So that's qualifications. On the other hand, a professional designation is completely owned, it's completely regulated by you, the guy who owns the business, the woman who owns the business, organized labor and organized business. There's no government interference, there's no South African Qualifications Authority interference in a professional body's designation framework. A designation can be withdrawn, whereas a qualification can't be withdrawn. And it can be withdrawn and is awarded not only for evidence competency. So you've got your training, you've got your qualification, or we've recognized you as competence. So that's fine. But more importantly, we want to know that you've got professional and accountable behavior that gets referenced every year or every second or every third year. A professional designation has a formative accredited qualification mapped to it as pre-qualifying requirements. But again, I want to emphasize, ladies and gentlemen, it might only be a matric certificate. It might only be a grade 10 school leaving certificate. It doesn't matter. It's for you to say what's important. Now, I started off today's discussion saying that professional bodies, first and foremost, are there for transformation. They're there to repair the ills of the past, particularly in blue-collar industries. And certainly coatings manufacturing and even coatings supply are blue-collar industries rather than white-collar industries. So we're not talking about law, we're not talking about engineering, we're not talking about medicine that are normally regulated by statutory bodies. We're talking here about blue-collar industries, the industries of the trades and the industries of the artisans and the industries of the workers. And in that regard, they have only since 1994 have we started to recognize the dignity of people who might have been in jobs for 20 or 30 years, but with no qualification and no recognition. And so professional bodies have this as one of their central tenets. How can we recognize through prior learning and how can we transform and how can we redress within the context of the new South Africa? How can we look at someone and say, because of the number of years you've given to the job, to the company, you're as qualified as someone who might come out of university with a 3-year degree. You do the same job. We hold you accountable for the same activity. We've been giving you performance appraisals for the last 20 years, and you've been getting increases for the last 20 years. And therefore, we recognize you, we truly recognize you as a professional. There are a multitude of practitioners in every industry, every sector, who have never had the benefit of obtaining a qualification, but if assessed, have sufficient relevant experience and practice to prove their competency, either for the purpose of being able to apply to our professional body for a designation, or if they're offered RPL, recognition of prior learning, by a training provider, they could get credit or in fact a whole qualification awarded. But that's not our focus. Our focus is not to give them a qualification. Our focus as a professional body is to give them access to professional recognition at the level at which they operate. A professional body has the flexibility and it has the license, the authority to apply recognition of prior learning in creative and transformative ways while not sacrificing quality along the way. And this is where CPD becomes important. Continuous professional development is used for one of two reasons. Either horizontal purpose, which is you recognize me as a professional operator in import and supply, and I, every 3 years, need to re-register for that professional designation. So I need to participate in continuous professional development that's presented to me by the professional body and offered by a whole range of training providers and product suppliers out there on a horizontal basis so I can retain that designation. Or I'm recognized at the technician level, but I want to move up to the operator level, and therefore I'm going to participate in the operator continuous professional development in this particular field of practice. And if I complete it successfully, I want to apply to the professional body for recognition at the operator level rather than remain at the technician level. So it's either horizontal CPD or vertical CPD that is managed by a professional body. So I've said a lot. And before I go on to, in fact, let me just do this. Before I go on to explaining what a designation physically looks like, what we are doing now is we're talking to you because we want you to either nominate yourself or a line manager who employs staff in your business, or an HR person who writes job descriptions and conducts performance appraisals, or any other person who employs or trains, develops, or disciplines for performance or behavior in the import, the supply, and the raw material distribution in the coating sector. So we need a group of subject matter experts. It doesn't have to be a lot of people, but it very definitely has to be people who understand jobs at the technical, the operator, and the professional level, who can work with us in designing our designations. And these are the questions which we need to have answered when we talk about professional designations in the import, the supply, and the raw material distribution for the coating sector. So how many fields of interest make up this particular industry? In other words, are there multiple? And is one import? And is that distinct from supply and raw material distribution? Or is it just one combined field of interest, which is import, supply, and raw material distribution? That's the first question. And then if combined, what technical entry-level designations, i.e. 3 years or less, maybe no qualifications, but some product training or process training? And it could be more than one technical designation, by the way. What operational designation? In other words, at least 3 to 6 years of experience, but what continuous professional development, product knowledge, process training should they have been on? And at the highest level of professional competence in import, supply, and raw material distribution, what professional designations for a person who should have some kind of a qualification and then at least 6 years or upwards of experience? I mean, there are instances, for example, a paint chemist who would only need to have 3 years of experience to be recognized as a professional coatings practitioner in the manufacturing sector. So it's absolutely up to you to determine. as a group of subject matter experts, we would then engage on what should be included at the master level of professional recognition. And again, you might confuse this as an honorary designation, and in some respects it is, except we expect them to participate in CPD the moment they become designated. In other words, what qualifications, what experience, what areas of experience would we like to require if combined? So these are questions that we're going to have answered in some way or another once we've got a group of subject matter experts together. Are your companies that do import, supply, and raw material distribution in such a way that you can't distinguish it as two industries, or that you can distinguish it as two industries? Only you can answer these questions as a group of subject matter experts. So that's absolutely critically important. And maybe I can pause at this stage, and I've said a lot. So I'm going to ask you to I'm going to hand over to you, and I'm going to ask you to talk to me should you have any questions, should you have any queries, etc., before we carry on.
Ivor, if you don't mind, I'll begin first as usual.
Yes, please.
Okay, now two issues. If you have to look at, typically we are a manufacturer and of supply chain to the paint manufacturers or the coatings industry. Okay. Now, typically, if you have to look at a shift supervisor or an assistant shift supervisor who has been on our plant for say 20 years, okay, but when actually he was employed, he just had a metric, and there is no professional designation or a professional course that person could go to, okay. And
Sanjeev, I'm so happy you've given that example, because it's a perfect example to use. So we have a job that is primarily doing rather than learning up until now, where the average academic requirement might be matric, all right, where we specify the matric certificate. We say it's so the professional operator in the import and supply sector who's a supervisor, where matric is the prerequisite qualification. A minimum of 6 to 10 years is the requirement for us to recognize them as professional, where in fact, once we've recognized that person as a professional operating practitioner in the import and supply and distribution sector, once we've recognized them, we then say to Tara, we need to get a supervision training organization that's accredited to offer a program which is based on a continuous professional development basis, which is to take, let's say there are 10 outcomes to that program, Sanjeev, and we want to spread those 10 modules in supervision over a 3-year period, where we make it a prerequisite that the individual completes that qualification or those modules before we re-register them as a professional operator practitioner in the import and supply and distribution sector. I'm just giving you one example of how we can make both the recognition of their current academic status as well as their future requirements make it an absolute possibility.
I hear that, Ivor, but obviously what I was trying to get to is that these shift supervisors or assistant shift supervisors are being trained on a continuous basis by shift chemists. Okay. Now, shift chemists do have your tertiary education in terms of BSc chemistry or MSc chemistry or BSc polymer chemistry, etc., etc. So those are well recognized by SAPMA and by different bodies. However, I'm talking one level down, where you have employed a metric where there is constant training given to them. Now, this training can only occur whilst the process is actually happening, right? There is no textbook for such learning. Now, how would you classify that? That's exactly what I'm saying, because it would be different for every organization, right? A supplier member of resin would have a very different standard operating procedure as opposed to a pigment manufacturer, as opposed to...
Sanjeev, very simple. And you know that SAPMA have now taken the view that it's more important to recognize internal training that takes place for purposes of what our sector does than, in fact, formal training that might take place at a university. So all we do is we say to a company, we want to recognize your internal training. We want to legitimate your internal training that paint chemist might do with that shift supervisor so that we recognize it. And as long as the guy completes it, we're very happy for the person who has got 10 or 15 years of experience, who has been coached or mentored or trained by that individual successively over, let's say, 2 or 3 or 4 years. We're very happy to recognize that work has been done, to recognize the beneficiary, who's the supervisor, as a professional supervisor.
So, Ivor, can I just come in here?
Yes, Dara.
Would that professional training, I mean, in-house training then, like Sanjeev is saying, there's no training material or any theoretical training in that, it's all practical. So then would like a workplace log sheet be then completed and then signed off by the supervisor to prove that that in-house training or that on-the-job training has been done, and we would recognize it that way?
100%. So what we would do physically is this. The subject matter expert committee that we're trying to put together by having this information sharing session with you, the subject matter experts that you nominate, Sanjeev, would sit down and agree that for the professional operating practitioner for import and supply and distribution, for that designation, the following are the 10 responsibilities we hold the shift supervisor accountable for. That becomes a checklist. And we then say to you, Sanjeev, okay, now I need your paint chemist to explain what they've done in terms of training and development and maybe recognition of prior learning, to develop each of those responsibilities in the supervisor, to show us a performance appraisal to show us that the individual is competent in each of these responsibilities because of the training they've actually obtained. And if they use material or if they use a process, to somewhat document the material of the process. It doesn't have to be more than a one-page template of what they do in terms of coaching and development. Because remember, we are not responsible for competency development. You are, as the internal training department in your company. We're responsible for recognizing these people because you say they're competent, and then for holding them accountable for their behavior, which from a performance appraisal, you say they're in good standing with you. So we're accountable for that. And then we're accountable for continuous professional development that we want that shift supervisor to participate in at a pace which the industry is comfortable with. All right, at a pace that you can be comfortable with and the shift supervisor can be comfortable with, and doesn't deviate attention away from their job to the training and the development side of things. All right. And so that's what a professional body is there for. It's not there to take responsibility for competency development. It's there to recognize that the guy's competent in whatever way we can recognize that they're competent. What we will do is we'll say, we're prepared to make these compromises at the technician level or the technical level and at the operational level. However, as far as the professional band is concerned, we're insisting on qualifications for the industry that we're recognizing. There might not be a qualification in import or supply or distribution, but in this instance there is, as you know. But the point I'm trying to make to you is we have more flexibility and leeway for the professional recognition at the technician level and at the operator level than at the professional level for the sector.
Absolutely. But again, if I may just come in there, Ivor, is, you are looking at a professional designation for import but that would be a very wrong category. Hypothetically, if I have to take our example, we would be in the manufacturing sector, and there would have to be a different professional designation for that, in my opinion. What are your views on that? You cannot have a same professional designation, or you cannot club them all in one. That's what I'm trying to get at.
So my answer is, if we needed to distinguish, then we'll distinguish. You're the director of this orchestra as an industry. What we can't do, Sanjeev, is do this. What we can't do is customize our designations per company. But what we do want to do is customize the professional recognition categories or labels per collection of companies.
Correct. So that's what I'm saying is that, the professional designation, and that's what I want to clearly distinguish is that a professional designation of an operator or a shift supervisor for paint manufacturers would be very different from polymer manufacturing, whether it be waterborne or solvent-borne. And we have a number of waterborne and solvent-borne manufacturers in the SAPMA wing. So I'm
just,
sure
just Sanjeev, let me play devil's advocate. Just explain how they would be different.
Because the processes are distinctly different.
Okay, but hold on. The responsibility for a shift supervisor is to manage the consistency, reliability, and the non-shutting down of a shift, right? Of a process.
Right.
Whether that applies to polymers or general manufacturing is on a range statement, but the responsibility is managing the process, not the content of the process.
No, equally important the content, because I'm just okay. Let me take an example to answer your question. Is if I have to hypothetically take a shift supervisor from a paint manufacturing company, okay, and employ him as a polymer shift supervisor on one of our shifts, he or she will fail terribly, okay, and vice versa.
Why would they fail? Why would they fail?
Because they are not aware of how the process works. There are two distinct processes.
Yeah, but Sanjeev, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm actually recognizing what you're saying. I'm saying they're responsible for process management, either process management in manufacturing or in polymers. All right. But their responsibility is process management. The range statement will say either process in polymer or process in manufacturing, but the responsibility is process management.
Okay.
Do you understand what I'm saying? So we would have professional operational practitioner, import, supply, and distribution, and in brackets, polymer or manufacturing, or how many others, because those are the elements that would appear on the range statement. But the responsibility of a supervisor is managing the process, irrespective of which industry you're in. Now, if we're saying that the industry itself needs to have a process to be able to move someone out of manufacturing into polymers who's a shift supervisor, then specify the process. Specify how the content of that process is different, and you immediately have the ability to put in brackets behind the designation. You have the ability to customize it for either manufacturing or polymers.
True, because that's exactly my point. Is that okay? Let me ask you this question. Rather. That would answer my question. Is that if I have hypothetically I get a CV of a shift supervisor who was in a paint manufacturing concern looking for a job, and he has been professionally designated, okay, can I and would I employ him?
You would employ him as if you want, an intern or a trainee, because he understands process management, but he doesn't understand the nature of the process he's managing in your company. And then you would say to him, I'm going to employ you for a 6-month period, during which time I'm going to train you about polymers.
Correct. But again, so the training aspect does come in again. So basically, all I'm trying to get at, you have actually answered my question, that the training aspect comes back again. He will have to be retrained to understand the process again, because he was only savvy with the paint manufacturing process, not necessarily with the resin manufacturing process. And hence, the designation that he holds is only true for the paint manufacturing process and not necessary for the polymer manufacturing process. And that's exactly my sort of point that I want to make here. It's little different in saying that, you know.
I completely get what you say, Sanjeev. Can I just ask this though? Are we talking about the manufacturing sector, or are we talking about the supply sector? Or are you saying that even in the supply sector, there is 30% of the process of the final manufactured product that gets manufactured in the supply sector?
No. Say that again. Sorry.
Okay.
Let me understand your questions.
All right. If
we
I'm
are-
importing,
Yeah.
I'm importing chemicals which can then be
Correct.
mixed into the manufacturing process.
So there is a value add.
Okay.
Correct?
Well, if there's a value add before it gets to the paint manufacturers, then you are saying that within the supply sector itself, or within the supply industry itself, I import raw materials which I pre-mix in some form or another before I on-sell them to the paint manufacturers.
Absolutely.
No, all right. No, fair enough. Fair enough. In that instance,
And it's not only mix, it's a process, it's a chemical process.
okay.
Every polymer manufacturer, whether waterborne or solvent-borne, we have 10 of them in our country, and all of them would be importing the feedstock, and they would be doing a huge amount of value addition to them in terms of the process, and then supplying it downstream to paint manufacturers.
Okay, so let me tell you the question that I've asked that you've now answered. What you've said to me is that the importers are one company that supply me, the supplier, with the raw material that I then pre-mix before I sell it to Dulux.
It's not a premix. That's what I'm saying. It's a process.
No, I understand. I understand.
Totally different. It's a different form. It's not a mixing.
No, I'm not suggesting that. Please, I misspoke. I'm not suggesting you open a packet and you mix it with water. I'm not suggesting that. I'm saying to you that I understand what you're saying. Now, my question is, let's first ask this question. Is there a difference between the importing company and Sanjeev's company that manufactures at least 30 to 40% of the final finished product?
Now, when you are saying an importing company that would compete with the polymer product locally, are you trying to get
No. Well, okay. So my question here is, are we talking about one industry or two industries? Or are we talking about one company that has expertise in terms of importing product and expertise in terms of manufacturing product to 40% of the finished product before it on-sells it to Dulux?
Okay, so let me put the sort of process semantics. Okay, as a polymer manufacturer, whether it be BASF, whether it be Dow, whether it be synthetic polymers, whether it be ferro, whether it be X, Y, or Z. I'm talking of all the polymer manufacturers in the country. They would buy certain feedstock locally, they would import a certain feedstock, and then there would be a full value addition.
Okay, Sanjeev, who would they buy the feedstock from?
Both local and import.
Okay, so that's a separate company they would buy the feedstock from?
Absolutely.
Okay, so you've answered the question.
So just taking an example, right now we have Gus from Savannah and Lisa from Savannah. So Savannah typically would be one of the suppliers of a feedstock to the polymer industries, hypothetically.
Okay, right. So Sanjeev, do you think Savannah should be included in our designation framework under supply and distribution? Or should Savannah, are there enough companies, Savannah kind of companies, to have their own designation framework, which is essentially based on procurement, supply chain, import, and local procurement?
Gus, Lisa, I'd like you to answer that.
I think perhaps you've got the wrong Lisa. I'm Lisa Taylor, NCS Color Center. I have been running CPD courses for architects since 2008. Those same courses have been available to the paint industry, and I have had about 3,000 paint industry members through my courses. And I think you're overcomplicating matters. I come from the architectural industry. About 25 years ago, we went through this whole process of recognizing those without qualifications and up to the architect 4-year course or 6-year course. What we did is we formed a body and we invited everybody and people with no formal qualification. It was called the OPA clause. You just had to provide your qualifications, your work experience, and you were invited to join. You joined in at a certain point. I think you're overcomplicating matters right now, and all we have to do is just invite everybody to join. My experience is that people in Africa, because I run my courses throughout Africa, are hungry for a piece of paper and a qualification, and to come and actually learn from a subject matter expert.
Okay,
So
thanks for that, Lisa. I think the reality is, however, that there are certain guidelines which are required by SAPMA to register
Absolutely.
a professional body against. And when you did that exercise, you were primarily focusing on people who were either trained as architects or people who were not qualified as architects, but working as architects, yes?
Or working as draftspeople.
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
With,
so there were people who wouldn't have attended.
It's a bit more simplistic in this industry.
There are people who wouldn't have attended, for example, a CAD program or a course in drafting, but they were doing CAD and drafting.
Yes.
So you RPL'd them against the outcomes of a formal qualification for CAD and drafting, and you recommended them to the professional body for recognition, right?
That's correct.
Okay, that's exactly the process we're talking about here. The only problem we've got, and Sanjeev, back me up or don't, but the only problem we've got is it's not as formalized as it was within either the CAD or the architectural. So we have to find that other solution.
Absolutely. Sorry, Lisa. I thought you were from Savannah. My sincere apologies for that.
No problem.
I see it is Busisiwe that was there. So my apologies to both for the cross connection. I did see Gus that was there, but I think he's left, so I'm not too sure. But anyway, having said that, yes, in the architectural coating or in the architectural side, it's very well defined. But unfortunately, I would concur with Ivor on this, that on our industry, it is much to be sort of desired. We would need to sort of RPL it a little more sort of kind of word by word. Ivor, is that what you are getting at, correct?
So yes, Sanjeev, I just want to come back to the issue, all right, of Savannah and your company. So remember, a professional body is responsible for the professional recognition of as many people who work in your companies generally, collectively, as possible. Now, if there are only a very few Savannahs, then in fact, we wouldn't be looking at what they do in terms of import or procurement and supply to you, the suppliers. We wouldn't be wanting to formalize the recognition of those jobs as professions. Instead, we'd want to be saying to SAFA, the South African freight importers, et cetera, rather do that for us. If, however, we find out that there are as many Savannahs as there are polymer manufacturers out there, then we would want to cater to them. Now, where there's a case that a polymer manufacturer also does its own imports, has an import department, then in fact we would need to develop designations which relate to the people who work in the import department as much as designations for people who work in the polymer manufacturing department of your one company. So at some stage, and we'll only do this exercise when we have subject matter experts in the room to be able to discuss this issue. But the question is, do we end up with one field of practice, which is import, supply, and distribution, or do we end up with two fields of practice? So
no, it would be two, Ivor, and I'll tell you why. Because a lot of polymer manufacturers would have import departments like us, which we would import directly and or from local sort of companies representing those principles in South Africa. So it would be kind of from both. It would be a two-pronged approach. Let's put it that way.
Okay. So what we're going to do when we have the subject matter experts identified, and that's the next stage, Tara, is to identify those people. But what we're going to do is put them into a Zoom, and then we're going to have this discussion about, are we talking about one field of interest or two? Should we develop all the designations and then look at whether or not they should be in two fields of practice? So let's park the field of practice issue for this moment in time. But this is an absolutely critical discussion. Sanjeev, I do assume, however, that there is enough distinction between the polymer manufacturer and the manufacturer who might work within a Dulux or a Plascon or a Promac, and therefore that there at least there is a distinction between those two industries.
Okay, I'm listening. I think I think it might be a good idea to probably, have those stakeholders at a meeting to even discuss that a bit further. It might be a good idea.
Okay, absolutely. But it's an important discussion. I'll tell you why it's an important discussion. It's an important discussion because the Department of Trade and Industry have what they call standard industrial classifications. And we need to reference whether in their standard industrial classifications, there is a distinction between the supplier and the manufacturer in the coating sector. And then make a decision if there aren't those codes, do we apply for those codes? And I'll tell you why those codes are so important. Because the Department of Trade and Industry develops supply-side incentive programs, physically funding grant mechanisms and loan mechanisms based on those industrial codes. And that's something we'll want to focus on down the line. All right, so thank you for that. That's critically important. Tara, I'm suggesting to you that what we want to do here now is we need to develop a list of those people who can, in fact, tell us what's in the jobs, what relates to behavioral requirements. So we now need to develop for the importer, the supplier, and the distributor a list of HR people or line managers or anybody who employs, trains, develops disciplines for performance or behavior in this import, supply, and raw material distribution world, and then put them together and say, right, now what we now need to do is we want to get to a stage where we can take you through the process of, I just want to find that one slide I want to show you. We can take you through the process for each designation of doing this with us, which is, this is a designation sheet. It says what's the title of the designation, what's the qualifications we think are important for this designation, what are the jobs important for this designation, and then what are the 10 outcomes or responsibilities. How do we recognize and assess those outcomes and responsibilities? How many years of experience do we need for those outcomes and responsibilities? What kind of experience, and what other evidence do we want to take into account? That's all that a designation is. And then someone comes along and says, okay, well, I've got this qualification and that qualification, etc. This is my job title. You'll see from my performance appraisal that these are the things I do in relation to the responsibilities. And here's my last performance appraisal or assessment. And I've been doing the job for 5 years. Then immediately we know where to locate this person in terms of the professional designation framework and which professional designation to assess them against. Immediately we know that. So that's where we want to get, but we can only do that once we've got subject matter experts who can help us populate every single designation descriptor in this way.
Sure, absolutely, Ivor.
Now, it's work that should have been done a long time ago, but we're starting now. It will take a lot of time, but we're starting now, and I'm very confident that we'll get to the stage sooner rather than later of being able to pilot these designations. And pilot the designations means, well, the designations have been completed. They've been loaded onto our management information system or our portal. People can now, HR people in companies can start submitting their employees to be considered for the various designations. We'll process them and test our machine for those designations. And once they're designated, we will then let continuous professional development kick in, because we will have gathered together all of the CPD elements for that designation to keep it as lifelong learning. That's our objective down the line.
True. Anyway, I need to run. I'm so sorry, but I'll need to excuse myself.
So, Sanjeev, my final question to you is, are you going to give Tara the name of either your HR person or a line manager who understands the job sufficiently to help us develop the designations in the polymer manufacturing sector?
I think I would like to run with it myself for the time being, because I think that would be most, because, we are lean and mean, and I would run with it. So, I would.
That's fantastic.
And then, if there is anything, it's good that at least we know what's happened.
Good. Tara, I take it you're going to manage this process from now on, and we're going to get to a stage of being able to pull those subject matter champions together so that we are then in a position to move forward.
Perfect. Yeah, so I'll send the presentation and the recording out to members and then get some feedback from them as to who can form part of that subject matter expert group.
Thank you so much.
And again, Tara, we would just need a little more representation. I'm actually quite sad to see the amount of representation we had today again. So, it's something again which we would have to really either sit down with our membership and explain to them that, guys, are you interested? We are doing all this for the industry, or are we just wasting our time?
Or should we let the paint chemists or the Corrosion Institute do it because of the level of apathy in our sector?
Yeah, I don't know, because I'm actually getting quite upset about it. We should have had far more people sort of attending this forum to understand, because I think it's a very important forum. I took out 1 hour of my time, not to say I'm free and I don't have things to do, but anyway, I think we need to address this issue even with our membership and at the Exco as we go forward.
Okay. Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you very much. And let's try and move forward. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks, Tara. Thank you.